welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into juries. Jury duty.
Yeah.
And we're going beyond the sort of like the typical courtroom drama, right? We actually have court documents from a case where things got really interesting during deliberations.
Oh, yeah. This is, we've got allegations of coercion.
Wow.
We've got a hung jury.
Oh, wow.
We even have a juror reading a Bible during deliberations.
Okay, so we got a lot to unpack here.
We do.
But I think one of the things that's really fascinating about this case is it highlights just how delicate, how many things go on at the same time.
Totally.
When a jury's trying to reach a verdict.
It's a huge responsibility, right?
It is a huge.
I mean, you're talking about, 12 people, sometimes less, depending on the type of case and the state that you're in.
Right.
But you're talking about a group of your peers who are tasked with essentially deciding someone's fate.
Yeah.
And they have to navigate all of their own individual experiences and perspectives.
And biases.
And and trying to come together to make this really weighty decision.
So let's actually put ourselves there for a second.
Okay.
Imagine you're on this jury.
Okay.
And it seemed like a pretty ordinary case. Right? Nothing too crazy, but things took a turn during deliberation.
Okay, so they get into the deliberation room, and that's when things really get interesting.
That's when it gets real.
Because it becomes this, like, pressure cooker in a lot of ways.
And that's where a lot of those, like, I don't know, like interpersonal or group dynamics come into play.
Yeah.
Because if you have these strong personalities and someone who feels very strongly one way or the other.
Well, and they sent out a note, right?
Yes.
The jury sent a note to the judge saying that they were deadlocked. They could not reach a decision.
So they were completely stuck.
They were stuck. And on top of that, one juror actually claimed that they were being coerced.
Oh, wow.
Into voting guilty.
Coerced.
Which is a huge...
That's a huge accusation.
That's a huge accusation. Because our system is really built on this idea of, the jury reaching a verdict freely.
Right.
No one without any undue pressure
should feel pressured to reach a certain decision, especially in this context.
Absolutely.
So there's a big deal, right? Like someone's life could potentially be in their hands.
Right.
So what happened when this accusation came out?
Well, so the documents show that the judge was walking a really fine line here.
Right.
Because he reminded the jury multiple times that they should not change their vote just for the sake of expediency, right?
Just to get out of there.
Just to get out of there,
right.
He emphasized over and over again that this was about justice.
Justice, not speed.
Not speed.
Right. It's not about, how quickly they can reach a verdict.
Right. And that's really important, right?
Right. Because it's like you don't want to pressure a jury into a verdict. But you also need a verdict.
You need a verdict.
So he's kind of walking this...
What's this total tightrope?
Tightrope.
Yeah.
And this is where this really fascinating area of legal precedent comes in. The Allen charge.
The Allen charge, yeah.
So tell us about the Allen charge. What is that?
So the Allen charge, it's basically a set of instructions that a judge can give to a deadlocked jury to encourage them to keep deliberating and try to reach some kind of decision. And it's named after this 1896 Supreme Court case.
Wow.
Allen v. United States.
But,
and this is really important, it's incredibly controversial.
Why is it so controversial?
Well, because like you were saying, you don't want to pressure the jury.
Right.
And so if I'm a juror, and the judge is saying, hey, you guys really need to try harder to reach a decision. I might feel pressure to just go along with the majority, even if I'm not convinced.
Exactly, because you don't want to be the one to hold everything up.
Right, and that's exactly why it's so controversial, because it can very easily stray into that territory of coercion.
Right.
And we don't want that.
Which undermines the whole right to a fair trial.
100%. And in fact, this case actually references another case.
Oh, wow.
State v. Nicholson.
Okay.
And in State v. Nicholson, the Louisiana Supreme Court actually banned the use of the Allen charge.
Really?
They said it's too coercive.
Wow.
We're not doing it.
Wow, so they straight up banned it.
Yeah, they said this is a potential threat to impartial justice.
Wow. That's really something.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show you how important it is to make sure that the jury's decision is actually their decision.
Right, because what's the point of having a jury if they're just going to be pressured into, what the judge wants or what they think the judge wants or what someone else wants. Right.
It defeats the purpose.
It defeats the whole purpose.
Exactly.
So how did the judge in this case handle this? Because you've got this Allen charge, which is controversial. Some states have even banned it.
Yeah.
But he also needs them to come to some sort of consensus, right?
Well, and that's where it gets really interesting, is that he seems to have been very aware of the controversy surrounding the Allen charge, because he very carefully avoided those specific phrases or instructions that have been deemed coercive.
Right. So he was very careful about his wording.
Very, very careful about his wording. But he still had to encourage them to reach a decision. So what he did was
So
he did something really kind of brilliant, I think.
Okay.
He reminded them that they could change their minds.
Oh, interesting.
He said, if after further discussion and consideration of the evidence, you are genuinely persuaded by other jurors, you are allowed to change your mind.
Oh, that's interesting.
And in fact, he encouraged them to reconsider their positions if they felt like they were persuaded by the arguments.
That's an important distinction.
It is.
Because he's not saying, you need to go back in there and figure it out.
Right.
He's reminding them that their individual opinions still matter.
Exactly.
That it's okay to change your mind.
Totally.
As long as it's, coming from a place of
genuine persuasion.
Right.
You're actually being persuaded by the arguments.
So that's really interesting.
It's such a fascinating case,
right? It is a fascinating case.
Because it's like, how do you balance those things?
Right.
How do you balance the individual right of a juror to their own opinion with the need for the jury to reach a verdict? How do you balance those things? Because they are in tension.
They are very much in tension. And, we talk about how this is a fascinating case, and it's about to get more fascinating.
It is.
Because one of the jurors...
Oh, my goodness.
...was reportedly reading a Bible during deliberations.
Okay, now we're getting to some really interesting territory here.
Right. So it's one thing to have... those interpersonal dynamics at play, right?
Sure.
Where you've got, people on the jury, maybe they're trying to persuade each other.
Right.
Or maybe they're, feeling pressure from one another.
Right.
But it's a whole other thing to bring in.
External material.
The outside influence.
Inside information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Especially a Bible.
A Bible, right? That's a big no-no.
A big no-no, right?
Yeah.
So the legal system, I would imagine, there's rules about this.
They have very specific rules about what's called extraneous materials.
Extraneous materials, yeah. Because you want to make sure that the jurors are basing their decisions on the evidence that's presented at trial.
Right.
And not on their outside research.
Right, or their
opinion or their Google searches.
Right, or in this case, religious texts. Right.
Right, exactly.
It needs to be about the facts of the case.
It has to be about the facts of the case as presented in the courtroom.
As presented in the courtroom.
And that's so important because we want to ensure that justice is blind, right? That it's impartial.
That it's not based on.
And it's not swayed by these outside influences. Right. Any of these other things.
Yeah.
So what happened with the Bible? Was the juror allowed
No, he was not.
to consult the Bible during the deliberations?
So the judge, in this case, again, really trying to uphold proper procedure here.
Right.
He directly addressed the issue.
Okay.
He ordered the Bible to be removed from the jury room.
Oh, wow.
And reminded the jurors of their duty to only consider the evidence presented at trial when making their decision.
So he shut that down pretty quickly.
He shut that down immediately.
But it does.
But it raises the question, right?
It raises so many questions because, where do you draw the line?
Where's the line?
Right. Because what if?
Right.
What if the juror wasn't trying to find answers in the Bible?
Right. Exactly.
Or they were just looking for
comfort
or solace.
Right.
Right.
Right. It's a stressful situation.
Yeah, it's a stressful...
People's lives are at stake.
Right. And you're making these huge decisions.
Absolutely.
So, where's that line between...
Totally.
Harmless personal item.
A personal item for comfort.
Versus something that's going to influence your decision.
That could potentially influence a verdict, right?
Right.
It's tough.
Tough to know.
Yeah, and I think that's where the judge has to really use their discretion, right?
Yeah.
And look at the totality of the circumstances.
Right. And speaking of decisions, let's actually talk about the verdict in this case.
Okay.
Because this case used a 10-2 verdict.
Okay. So not all 12 jurors
Which means not all
were in agreement.
Not all 12 jurors agreed. Right.
Right.
And that might surprise some people.
It might, because a lot of people think that jury verdicts have to be unanimous.
Right.
But the Sixth Amendment, which guarantees the right to trial by jury, doesn't actually specify that it has to be a unanimous verdict, especially in state criminal trials.
Wait, so you're telling me that in some states, you can be convicted of a crime?
It's true.
Even if not everyone on the jury thinks you're guilty.
That's exactly right.
Welcome
to the wild world of the American legal system.
That's a lot to process, right?
It is a lot to process.
Because you think about, a jury of your peers, right? Like it's
kind of ingrained, right?
It's ingrained in our mind.
In our minds, we assume it means everyone has to agree.
Right. It's unanimous.
Right. And it's not always the case.
It's not always the case.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, very interesting.
Very interesting.
So you're saying it's up to each state to decide if they want to require like a unanimous jury or not.
It's exactly right. Yeah. Each state gets to decide.
Wow.
And there's no nationwide standard on this.
So it's like
which I think surprises a lot of people.
It's a patchwork, right?
It's a total patchwork of laws.
So, what are the arguments for and against these non-unanimous verdicts? Because it seems like a pretty weighty decision to leave up to just chance based on geography.
So people who support non-unanimous verdicts, they'll often say that it helps avoid hung juries. And mistrials, which they say saves time and money and resources for everybody.
So their argument is basically
Their argument is that by requiring unanimity, you're giving a single juror too much power.
Right. One person can hold everything up.
One person can hold everything up and potentially, lead to a mistrial or something like that.
So it's about keeping the wheels of justice.
It's about efficiency,
keeping things moving.
But then on the other hand, you've got...
Right. Then you've got the other side.
Who
say, whoa, right.
Right.
This whole thing is based on beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
That's the standard. Right.
Right.
And if even one person has doubts, shouldn't that be enough to at least prompt more discussion?
And potentially lead to a hung jury.
Right, because you would hope that they would want to be absolutely sure.
Right. Especially when someone's liberty is at stake.
This
is not about speed and efficiency.
It's not about just checking a box and moving on.
Exactly.
Right.
It's about making sure that we get it right.
But making the right decision.
Yes.
And then another argument against these non-unanimous verdicts is...
Yes, is the potential for bias.
Okay, tell me more.
So... especially in cases where, let's say you have some racial or ethnic differences between the defendant and the majority of the jury.
Right.
Critics worry that those dissenting voices might get ignored.
Because they're in the minority, right? Yeah.
Because they're in the minority.
Even if they have, valid concerns, it's just we've got 10 people who think this.
Right, and so they worry that these non-unanimous verdicts, while they're legal, might actually... have this disproportionate impact
on
certain
marginalized communities
who are already, let's be honest,
who already face an uphill battle, right?
Yeah, they're already facing an uphill battle in the legal system.
Absolutely.
So then this isn't just
this is real.
That's a philosophical.
It's real world stuff.
It's real world stuff.
Yeah, this has real consequences.
It has a real world consequence.
The real people.
So this kind of makes me think about that Apodaca decision.
Right, where they said these non-unanimous verdicts are constitutional.
Right.
Given these concerns, is there any chance the Supreme Court would ever, revisit that ruling?
I think it's possible, and I think that legal experts are looking at some of the recent decisions of the Supreme Court, and they're saying, this is interesting.
Right.
Because it seems like they're really interested right now in revisiting some of these questions about individual rights, right? And how they pertain to states' rights.
Yeah, so how much power do states actually have?
How much power do states have?
Right.
And it seems like the court might be shifting a little bit in that area.
So are you saying that even though...
But you mentioned earlier the case of McDonald.
Yeah, McDonald v. City of Chicago.
McDonald v. City of Chicago, which was about the Second Amendment.
Right, gun rights.
Right. And so even though it's not about juries, it's about guns. The way that the court ruled in that case has people wondering, I wonder how they're going to apply this in other areas of law.
So you're saying that McDonald case could have ripple effects.
Potentially.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Because McDonald really focused on this idea of the 14th Amendment, right?
Okay.
And the idea that the 14th Amendment is supposed to make sure that the states are upholding everyone's individual rights.
Got it, got it. So it's like...
And so now people are looking at cases like Apodaca.
Right, which was about jury trials.
Which was about jury trials. And saying, well, if they're going to apply this stricter standard of review to the states under the 14th Amendment, could that potentially impact the Apodaca decision?
Right, because you've got this question of, like, are people's rights being violated by these non-unanimous verdicts?
That's a question, right?
Wow.
That's the question a lot of people are asking.
This is fascinating because it's like we started out talking about this one case.
Right.
And we're seeing how it's connected to all these other...
It's all interconnected.
All these other cases and all these other bigger issues about...
Bigger issues.
You know, individual rights. And,
it's about federalism.
And states' rights.
Right.
Like, it's this whole...
It's all tied together.
It's all tied together.
And that's what's so fascinating about studying the law, right?
Right.
Is that it's not just about these abstract principles.
Right.
It's about how these principles play out in the real world.
In the real world.
Yeah, with real people.
With real people who are being impacted.
And that's what this case really, I think, highlights.
Right. It's like we think about a jury of your peers, and it sounds so simple.
Right. We think about, 12 people in a room, they'll figure it out.
Right.
But it's so much more complicated than that.
It's so much more nuanced. There's so much more going on.
There's so much more going on. There's so many...
Behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes things happening.
Right.
And I think this case really underscores how much is at stake in every single trial.
Right. And how important it is for the jury, for the judge, for everyone involved to, like, be aware of these things.
Be aware of it.
And to really
try to
prioritize fairness.
Prioritize fairness above all else.
Above all else, right.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
It's about justice.
It is about justice.
It really is. Yeah, it makes you really appreciate just how much responsibility everyone in that courtroom has.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things I think about a lot with this case is just how it highlights that tension, right?
Yeah.
Between finding a verdict and making sure that that verdict is reached fairly.
Right, because you can't have one without the other.
You can't, and it's so easy, especially when we see these things on TV, right? To simplify it, to be like, oh, they're going to find this person guilty or not guilty.
Right, like it's just a simple decision.
Right, but we don't always see all of the nuance.
And deliberation, the arguments.
The back and forth.
The evidence.
The careful consideration of all of these different factors.
And the instructions from the judge and the potential for bias.
And the ways in which.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a huge responsibility.
So, I mean, what advice, right? Like if someone's listening to this. And they're like, okay, I might get called for jury duty someday.
Right.
What advice do we give them?
Take it seriously.
Take it seriously.
That's the biggest thing. You know, a lot of people...
We joke about it.
We joke about
like, ugh, I got jury duty.
Right. How can I get out of it?
But it's like, no, actually.
But it's important. This is a cornerstone of our democracy. It's a cornerstone of our justice system.
So we should
all be willing to participate.
Be willing to serve.
Be willing to serve. And when you're there, be present.
Right.
Listen with an open mind.
Right.
Engage in the process.
Don't take it lightly.
Don't take it lightly.
Because these are
real people's lives.
Real people's lives that are being impacted by these decisions.
Absolutely. And I feel
it's so easy to get caught up in the drama of it all.
It is. It's easy to get swept up in the narrative.
Right. Especially when it's like a high-profile case.
Right. But we have to remember that at the end of the day...
At the end of the day...
It's about justice.
It's about justice. Right. It's not about entertainment.
It's not about being a juror on TV.
Right. It's not about writing a book about it afterward.
Right.
It's about
making sure that the process is fair.
That justice is served.
And that the outcome is just...
Right.
Because everyone deserves that.
This case really does a good job.
It does.
Of highlighting just how
complex.
How nuanced.
How nuanced.
How challenging this all really is.
How important it is.
Right. Because we say, like, oh, you have a right to a trial by jury. But it's like, but what does that actually mean?
What does that actually mean in practice?
What does that look like?
What does it look like? What are the procedures?
Right. What are the rules?
What are the potential pitfalls?
Right. And
And the thing is, those answers...
It's different everywhere we go, right?
They're different everywhere you go.
Because every state
has their own rules.
Their own rules, their own laws.
It's fascinating.
It's amazing.
Well, on that note,
I
think we're going to have to leave it there.
I think so.
But thank you so much
for having me.
For taking us on this deep dive.
Of course.
Into the world of jury duty.
It was my pleasure. This was a really interesting case to unpack.
It was a fascinating case.
Lots of twists and turns.
Lots of twists and turns. So for everyone listening, the next time you get that jury summons,
oh, throw it away.
Don't throw it away.
Don't try to get out of it.
Think of us.
Think of this case.
Think of this case.
Think about all of the things that we talked about. And consider it an opportunity to really participate in this.
Absolutely.
Really vital part.
A really important civic duty.
Of our justice system.
A cornerstone of our democracy.
Well said. All right. Until next time, everyone.
See you next time.
Stay curious.